Legends of Greek Mythology. The Story of Perseus. Part 1. Perseus and the Medusa. Acrisius, the king of Argos, was once very much frightened by a saying of the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. The oracle had said that King Acrisius would be killed by his own grandson. Now King Acrisius had only one child, a daughter, Danae. And to prevent the saying of the oracle from coming true, he caused Danae to be shut up in a strong brass tower. Nevertheless, when the spring came, and the power of the sun grew greater, when trees began to put out their young leaves or their fuzzy yellow flowers, and when young lambs were bleating in the fields, the news reached King Acrisius that a golden child had been born in the tower. The golden child was a beautiful baby with blue eyes, a clear white skin, and golden rings of soft hair, all of which the Greeks thought very wonderful. King Acrisius was quite beside himself with fright when he heard of this piece of news, and he immediately commanded that Danae and her golden child should be put into a brass-bound chest and allowed to float out to sea. So Danae and her baby drifted slowly out to the great sea, where they had only gulls and a few smaller seabirds for company. The waves rocked the chest gently, and the golden-haired baby slept in his mother's arms and did not know that there was anything to fear. But Danae thought of strong winds and high waves, and of sharks and other great fish that lived in those waters, and her heart was full of terror. The chest drifted all night on a quiet sea. In the early morning the tides brought it close to the island of Seriphus, where it became entangled in a fisherman's nets. Dictys, the fisherman to whom the nets belonged, when starting out for his day's fishing, saw the chest and drew it in. He took Danae and her baby to his brother Polydectes, who was the king of that island. King Polydectes was willing that Danae should stay on the island, and Danae was very thankful for this kindness. She found a good home there, for Dictys and his wife took her into their own cottage and did all they could to make her comfortable. When the golden child, which Danae named Perseus, grew up, he became a strong, handsome youth who attracted much attention from the people everywhere. King Polydectes began to wish that the brass-bound chest had never floated to the island of Seriphus. In fact, he took a great dislike to Perseus, a dislike which became an active hatred. The stronger and handsomer Perseus grew, and the more admiration his youthful strength and beauty called forth, the more King Polydectes hated him. He finally began to think over plans for getting rid of him forever. On a rocky, dreary, barren island which lay in the midst of the sea a long way from the island of Seriphus and from every inhabited country, there lived 3 fierce sisters who were called the Gorgons. These strange sisters had faces like women, but do not seem to have been like women in any other respect. They had eagle's wings with glittering golden feathers, scales of brass and iron, claws of brass, and great fierce-looking tusks, which must have made a strange appearance with their human faces. Worst of all, instead of hair, their heads were covered with venomous snakes that were always twisting themselves about and putting out their forked tongues, ready to bite anything that came within reach. The 2 oldest Gorgons had always been just as fierce creatures as they were now, but the youngest, who was called the Medusa, had once been a beautiful woman who was very proud of her long black curls. In spite of her beautiful face, this woman's heart was like the hearts of the Gorgons, and to punish her for a wicked deed she had done, the gods changed her curls into writhing vipers and made her face so terrible that anyone who looked at it was immediately changed into stone. In all other respects, she became a sister to the Gorgons and had to go and live with them. She was the most frightful one of all because of her power of changing men into stone. Now King Polydectes knew all about the Gorgons, and he made up his mind that there could be no better way of getting rid of Perseus than to send him after the Medusa's head. So one day he called the young man to him and told him that he expected to be married soon to the princess Hippodamia, and asked him to bring to the wedding feast as his gift the head of Medusa. He added that unless Perseus brought the head with him, he must never come back to the island of Seriphus again. And then, to make matters worse, he shut Danae up in an underground dungeon and said she should not come out till Perseus brought him the head. Perseus did not even know where the island of the Gorgons was, nor how to find it. He thought it must be somewhere in the western sea, and as he stood on the shore looking off at the place in the west where the sky came down to meet the water, he suddenly noticed that two people were standing on the sands by his side. One was a very tall woman who wore a helmet on her head and carried a very bright shield on her arm and a lance in her hand. The other was a young man with wings on his cap and on his sandals, a winged staff in his hand, and a crooked sword that shone like a flame at his side. Perseus knew that the tall woman was Minerva and the young man Mercury, and that they had come to help him. This was just what he had been expecting, for the gods of Olympus often appeared at just the right time, ready to help those who were brave and determined to do all they could for themselves. First, Minerva told Perseus how to find the island of the Gorgons. She said that he must ask the 3 gray women, who were cousins of the Gorgons, and that nobody else in the whole world could give him the necessary information. Next, she said that when he had found the Gorgons, he must not touch either of the older ones, because they were immortal, and he must by no means look at the Medusa, lest he be turned into stone. Then she took her own bright shield from her arm, and holding it high above her head, bade Perseus see how the shells and pebbles on the shore were all reflected in it. She said that when he was ready to strike off the Medusa's head, he must look at that terrible face only in his shield, which she would lend to him for that purpose. Now it was Mercury's turn. He lent Perseus his own crooked sword, a sword so sharp that it would cut through brass or iron or any other hard substance. This was the only sword that would cut through the Gorgon's scales. Then he offered to show Perseus the way to the home of the 3 gray women who lived in Twilight Land, a land lying somewhere among the mists that rose from the sea. The two immediately set out. They journeyed far to the north till they came to a land of cold and fogs. The farther they went, the thicker the fogs became and the darker it grew. At last, in the dim light, they could see faintly, coming toward them, 3 very old women. Long gray hair hung over their shoulders. Their garments and even their faces were gray, and they groped along in the fog as if they could not see. They seemed to be quarreling about something. As they came nearer, the quarrel proved to be about the use of their one eye, for they were so very old that they had only one eye and one tooth among the 3. "Be quick, Perseus. Now is your time," said Mercury. "Seize their one eye, and then you can compel them to tell you how to find the Gorgons. They will never tell you of their own free will." So Perseus seized the eye and would not give it back till the gray women had answered his questions. They said that the only way to find the island of the Gorgons was to ask the Hesperides, the daughters of Night. These nymphs were the guardians of the famous golden apples in the garden of the Hesperides, which lay near the place where the giant Atlas held up the sky. Then Mercury and Perseus started out again, and this time they went far to the west, over land and sea, till they found the garden of the Hesperides. The nymphs of the garden received Mercury and Perseus in a friendly manner. They said they had been expecting the hero who was to slay the Medusa, and should be glad to help him. They pointed out to Perseus the island of the Gorgons, already dimly visible on the horizon. Then they brought him a pair of winged sandals which had the power to bear their wearer through the air as fast as Mercury's own, the helmet of darkness which belonged to Pluto and made its wearer invisible, and the magic pouch in which he could safely carry the head of the Medusa. Perseus was now well armed and ready for his work. With Minerva's bright shield, Mercury's crooked sword, the winged shoes, the helmet of darkness, and the magic pouch, he had not so very much to fear after all, even from the terrible Gorgons, and was eager to begin the battle. Thinking that the Gorgons would be asleep by midnight, he waited until that time, and then flew straight to the island. As he hovered over it, like a great golden hawk, he looked into Minerva's shield by the light of the full moon, and saw a frightful sight. There were all three of the Gorgons fast asleep. Around them was what looked at first like a confusion of strange brown rocks, but the seeming rocks were really men and animals that had been changed to stone by the sight of the Medusa's face. Keeping his eyes on the shield, Perseus dropped lightly down, and in a flash he had cut off the Medusa's head and dropped it into the magic pouch. Then he sped away on the winged sandals, and it was well that he had these sandals and Pluto's helmet to make him invisible, for the remaining Gorgons woke and sprang after him with a terrible cry. He could hear the rushing of their gold-feathered wings, the rattle of their brass claws, and the hissing of the snakes on their heads. But these sounds, and even their terrible cries, soon died away, for the Gorgons could not follow far a foe they could not see. So Perseus got safe away with the Medusa's head. Minerva and Mercury had been near Perseus all the time, although since he left the garden of the Hesperides, they had not chosen to make themselves visible to him. Minerva heard the shrill cry of the Gorgons, and she set it into a musical instrument, which she made on the spot of thin beaten bronze, taken no doubt from the hard scales of the Medusa. Many people have said that this musical instrument was the flute, but as Minerva was a war goddess, I am sure that it must have been some kind of war trumpet, and it probably sounded like our fife. Afterward, the goddess set the dreadful head of the Medusa on her shield, or sometimes she wore it on her aegis. But before Perseus returned the shield to Minerva and presented her with Medusa's head, he met with many more adventures.